Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Ask an Expert. We are doing this at a different time and a different day this week, but I could not be more thrilled to be jumping into the topic of the ECP program with Emily Mastervich and Robin Walker, and two total experts in the sport and experts on ECP. And Emily, Robin, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you guys, we're Emily and Robin are really gonna walk us through not only what ECP program is, and I know I'm always inclined to say ECP program, which I realize is saying program twice, but I will do my best to not do that throughout this whole thing. But before we dive right into ECP, Emily and Robin, I'm going to start with you, Emily. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself and kind of what your position is at USEA?
Sure. I've been eventing my whole life, and actually, I've known Robin since I was a teenager. Grew up in Michigan, now live in Virginia. I've competed myself through the five-star level, joined the ECP as an instructor in 2009. That's when I was first certified. So I've been really interested in the program for many, many years, and then was asked to come onto the committee. And in 2022, I was added to the faculty.
Awesome. And then Robin, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your involvement with USEA?
I started obviously in England years and years ago. As Emily said, I've known her a long time. Came over here in the early 90s, and Mark Phillips was coach then of the team, and the program wasn't founded. I got asked to go by Mark to go to the initial coach selection procedure, which started in Virginia, 6 days of that. And since then, I've become a level 5 instructor in the program, an assessor, co-chair. I shared that with Phyllis and now Jennifer Rousseau, and that's been the trip.
Awesome. Well, two better people could not be joining me to talk through what ECP is. Excuse me. So let's start right there. Can you guys kind of share when ECP was created, why it was created, and what is ECP?
I should probably, I'll probably take that because I was there nearly at the beginning. In the beginning, there were what they called it guiding minds. Those guiding minds would have been Mark Phillips, Eric Horgan, Karen. I'm going to forget somebody, I know, because it's a long time ago now. But we weren't involved in that. As I say, Mark was teaching a clinic up in Michigan, and we were sat drinking a beer talking about old times in England. And he said, we're starting this program because America doesn't have an official education program. Most of the other countries still do, some very formal, like Germany. England would have the riding centres, Talland, Waterstock, Yorkshire, Chris Bartle, that type of thing. But America was not blessed with that. This was the effort to start a national program. And that turned into, as I said, going to Virginia for 6 days. That was fairly intimidating. Everybody standing there watching you teach. And then I got asked to go to Longwood, Florida, for another session. That was equally intimidating when I had to teach Donna Smith on Gilt Edge, a cross-country lesson in front of everybody. And then after that, those of us that were left standing, I guess, we went up to Jackie's farm in Virginia, and there was another session and then an interview, and that's how the faculty was created. And from then, there was a huge push to get people certified and people on the same page, because there was a huge divergence of opinion in some quarters and not a lot of structure. So that was how it's really developed since then.
Yeah. And so ECP stands for Eventing Coaches Program.
Correct.
Can one of you guys talk through, yeah, I mean, Robin, you kind of touched on it, but what is the primary purpose of the program and how is that primary purpose how is that executed?
Well, safety for the cross country. I remember when I first got involved in it, the big push was we've got to be safe, we've got to be responsible, we've got to have a better system about how we're training horses and riders at every level. Everybody learns to ride somewhere. And uh, in the beginning, you'd have like I said, a huge divergence of theory and practice. And the same complaints that you hear these days about warm-up rings and what goes on and riding and standards, and they were alive and well back then. There was just more of it, and it was a free-for-all. Now, that said, there were some really, really good, solid programs, but they were few and far between. In the middle of that, because of the size of the country, there were huge, and there still are, huge areas that are almost void of any kind of consistent, educated instruction. And as the sport moves forward, and as we go forward, and it's a much more thorough test now than it was when I started. Not that it wasn't a thorough test then, but now, as it's trickled down, you just think about the training level. I'm sure Emily will agree with me. The training level last weekend at Rocking Horse, and you've got to have your homework done, and you're getting an examination, and that wasn't necessarily the case back earlier in the early days. Now it's turned into a much more, like I say, a much more thorough test, and the standard's higher. If you're not doing 20 dressage now, you're not competitive. The days of a poor dressage and catching up on cross country, I think, are well and truly gone in a lot of contexts. The push was for a higher standard, a more universal standard, a more consistent way of presenting the information across the board, coast to coast.
Got it. And I guess that's a good time to walk over to kind of what the curriculum is that coaches are being put through in order to get certified. How is that curriculum being developed, and how often is it being iterated on in order to kind of adjust to the evolution of the sport that you're talking about?
We start in the beginning. It was the instructor certification program, and there's an awful lot of information in that curriculum that as faculty we have to get through in a workshop. We've had several conversations as faculty about the amount of information and whether it can actually all be absorbed. And we've paid a bit of a price for that as a program in the early days. But it became apparent that that we weren't really keeping up with the way the sport was going. Our curriculum was stale, is the wrong word, probably a bit stale and not really current. I think Emily will agree with me. So we set about changing the whole thing and revamping the whole program so it was more modern, up to date, to speed, and also that the standards that were expected were actually written down so that they were openly accessible to anybody. The idea with the revamping of the program is that any mum and dad can go and get the information through the handbook in their hand, and they know what to expect, what the program expects from the coaches. And that gives, I think, a huge reference to, is this actually going on? I think we should be clear enough in our instruction that our mums and dads watching their kids learn can actually understand what's going on, rather than it be this mysterious process that lives in the clouds and one day you'll get it right after 1,000 years practice. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, so that's why, as he was referring to, we went ahead and went through and redeveloped the handbook. It provides, one is commonality of language, in terms of what we want to offer from the program. As Robin was saying, with as big as our country is, one of the things that we found was just even simple things that we're telling people were not necessarily thought of in the same way. So commonality of language, the handbook really does outline each level, what for each phase, it's all encompassing, right? So each level, each phase, what expect from the riders, what we expect the coaches to be able to teach the riders, a skill set that's important, and how to build on that. So as he was saying, that way the parents, the riders themselves have access to this information and they can know whether or not they're on the right path.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And and apologies if my questions here are like, I'm coming at this from not having participated in ECP, obviously. So is the curriculum itself, is any of it like, here's a scenario with a rider, like a kind of like a practice scenario, like this student is having trouble with fill in the blank. How would you address this? Or kind of what is an example of kind of how the curriculum is structured for coaches?
How it works.
Yeah.
When your workshops, there's a lecture at the beginning of a workshop. We've just had two at the farm here. Mary Darcy came and did the dressage and the jumping workshop. So the day will start with a lecture, and then there's a demo lesson. And you're not setting up situations to fix. You're looking at what's in front of you and how are you going to improve it, make it better, and how's he going to develop the whole thing. There's the introduction of a formal lesson plan, which I actually found quite difficult in the beginning when we started this. But once you master it, your ability to assess the situation, come up with a plan, and run through it, I think Emily will agree as well, turns you into much more. You're a teaching machine by the time you get that embedded into you. So there's the introduction of that whole process. And then each individual instructor gets to teach a lesson, which is critiqued by the faculty. And that process will go on 3 days or 2 days, depending on how many people. In the beginning, it was very intense. We had 2 lots of 8. We'd have 2 faculty and 16 students. So you had 8 people to do. 3 days on the flat, 3 days jumping, and the groups would swap so that they got to experience each of the faculty members, and they'd get to teach enough and deal with enough real life situations that turned up with the demo riders and horses. That there was I've never experienced a situation where we've deliberately gone, and we don't deliberately set things up. Usually what happens is things just turn up, and there's your teaching moment as a faculty person right in front of you with an instructor. And you'll get all sorts of reactions in that scenario, as I'm sure Emily will agree. You'll get confident instructors who look at it and go, okay, I know how to deal with that. You'll get instructors that just stop and go, okay, I need help. What do I do? And that's, as a faculty member, that's how it plays out. And you've got to be quite balanced yourself in that. There's a lot of empathy involved there. People come and they try really hard, and it's not about making people feel inadequate. And just because they lack experience doesn't mean they haven't got enthusiasm. So you want to encourage them down that road and get their brains working according to their experience. And that's how a workshop functions. Wouldn't you agree, Emily? And then at the end, you sit down and there's an assessment of what they do, mentoring, more mileage, you're okay, go forward to your assessment, or you might want to do a bit more homework, or depending on how those days have gone.
What we're trying to do in those live sessions is really help the instructors to prioritize what they're seeing, as Robin said, right? So based on safety first, how would they address certain situations? I mean, there are plenty of times where the different coaches will ask questions about specific scenarios, as you're saying, like a specific problem that arises, or what if this happened instead? So I think a big part of what's great about this whole program, what I've found to be the most fulfilling, is that you have this community, this network where you can ask questions. You can talk about different scenarios. So even if we're not necessarily presenting a specific problem, there's certainly plenty of conversation about it and plenty of different opinions as to kind of how to go about things. So it's really about teaching these instructors to prioritize what they're seeing in front of them, and then also just to have a huge toolbox to be able to go to help work through those situations.
One thing we haven't touched on yet is the different levels and kind of how those come into play with the certification process. Can you guys talk through the level 1 through level 5, kind of what are the different requirements and expectations and how they differ between the levels?
Sure. We've sort of revamped them recently, and we actually, through a lot of discussion last year, added the starter level because we were realizing that that was a big area that we needed to supply good coaching to. So we actually started the starter level now. We added that below level 1 through level 5. They do correlate quite a lot with the competition levels, but as we keep adding competition levels, we've had to continuously sort of revamp those levels. So they're listed on the USEA website. Level 1 is beginner novice. Level 2 is novice. There's level 1 beginner novice and novice. And then level 2, there's training and modified. So a coach can apply to be certified based on the students that they have, and that level correlates in that way. 3 is preliminary and 2-star. 4 is intermediate and 3-star. And then 5 is through the advanced level, 4 and 5-star.
And the levels themselves, those apply to the student. Does the coach have to have competed through those levels as well?
No, it applies to the students that you're teaching. And you have to have, when you go through this process, you have to have 3 students that you've been coaching at the highest level you're trying to achieve.
Okay. And does the student need to have a certain level of success at that level, or it's just having completed?
There's a lot of conversation back and forth about that, especially because with these new levels being added, Coaches around the country have trouble sometimes having a certain number of students at a certain level. The success certainly comes into play. At this point, it's just having students at that level. It gives us a little bit more information before the coach comes to do the workshops and the assessment. It just gives us a little more background as to what they've been doing and who they've been helping. So there's not necessarily a required success rate for the students, but it's certainly something that is considered and looked at.
Makes sense. Wonderful. So how what is your is there like a statement or bullet points as far as what is the incentive for coaches to participate in ECP?
I guess I'll start with that, and then
Yeah, go on.
Robin can chime in. Uh, I think for me, there are benefits in multiple ways. On a personal level, it gives you an added bit of confidence, right? To say, okay, these people are out here, my peers that I respect believe that I'm doing the right thing, right? And they believe that I'm headed on the right path. But then it's also in a professional nature, it gives you a little more security in a way, right? I mean, it lets everyone know that you are performing the best practices for our sport. And with the way that the sport is being directed at the moment, I think that's really important for all of us as professionals to want to support the improvement of the sport, the improvement of coaching, and as we were saying at the beginning, the high standard.
That makes sense. Robin, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and especially because I've been involved in it for so long. And one of the questions I get asked pretty frequently is, why are you still involved in it? Like I said in the beginning, I I I went just because I was advised to, and just because I'd done some stuff in England to a high level and been on a developing rider team back in the 80s, which would have been like a mini Nations Cup in Ireland back then. That didn't mean that I had any standing here. When I first went to Virginia, I only had novice students because I'd only been here a short period of time. And to be rubbing shoulders with, I'd met David and Karen already because they were based in England a lot. And to be rubbing shoulders with all these people, I found on that tremendously useful personally. And I've never missed a faculty day until last year in California, because I couldn't go because of the farm. But I've used it as a huge well of information. And as Emily's talking about support, we can talk about things. And there's many roads to the city. So to have that camaraderie and that willingness to share information. And I think you always have to have an inquiring mind and a good dose of humility, because the horses will end up putting manners on you eventually, or circumstances will, whether you're coaching or riding. So I've always found that tremendously useful. And when you're teaching the workshops as well, somebody will say something that you'll go, even though you don't say it probably, you'll go, I wonder why I didn't think of it that way. I've had lots of that experience. So I've just found it tremendously useful. As I say, faculty day I've always enjoyed that, the banter, the talking, the way other people come and attack the problems, the way their intellect works, the way they process things from that high standard. I couldn't encourage people more to get involved down that road if you're serious about or becoming a serious coach.
Absolutely. So that's a great transition to how people do get involved. What should a coach kind of where does a coach start if they want to become involved with ECP? And do they have to start at level 1, or do they can they start at whatever level is applicable to them? Can you guys talk me through that?
Sure.
Emily?
The first step is contacting Nancy at the USEA. All that information is on the USEA website, but Nancy's the go-to to get started. And she has all the information as to when workshops are happening. I mean, obviously, just going up and talking to any of the faculty is another good way to get information, but the actual process starts with Nancy. You do not have to start at level 1. You can start at whatever level is applicable to you. And that is part of what we also go through in the workshops. We discuss with the coaches at the end of the workshop whether or not we feel they should continue on whatever level they're trying to go with, whether they should get some mentoring to be ready for that level, whether they should maybe step down a level. And they're always able to level back up as well.
Got it. And how much does it cost to become certified?
There is a $75 registration fee that gets you all the information. And then you're required to participate in both a dressage and a jumping workshop. Those are each $450. And then the assessment itself is $550.
Okay. And then are there once you're certified, are you certified for life or kind of how do you retain your certification?
So it basically goes on a 4-year cycle of proving continuing education. There are some other things we have to do. The CPR, first aid and CPR, you have to go through a concussion protocol module. So things like that that you're required to maintain along with your insurance. And then the continuing education, proof of continuing education is a 4-year cycle. And within that is teaching a cross country lesson once every 4 years. So we do keep touching base with everyone.
Got it. Are there mentorship opportunities within ECP for coaches working towards certification?
There's nothing formal set up. There's not a formal plan, but that's certainly something that is provided. It's usually on a one-on-one basis with specific faculty members based on what the coach is looking to do.
Okay. And when it comes to, so let's talk a bit about the maintaining a certification. When I think a lot of times people like once you get certified, and then let's say that certified coach is at a competition and maybe isn't holding up the principles that were instilled in them during the certification process. Is there anything that happens then as far as re education or any sort of let's flag that this happened? Or how does that kind of work? Or is that part of the program at all right now?
You want me to deal with that?
Go for it.
We do have a watch list, and that doesn't get used very often, but it has been used. And senior instructors, if they see something egregious enough, can quietly report that, and then that will be dealt with from the office. And that usually a significant enough experience that things get straightened up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's not happened too many times, but it has happened.
Yeah. What about the insignificant experiences? Not I mean, they're not and none of them are insignificant, but what if about the smaller things along the way? Is there I guess is there any like in New York, I live in New York and everyone's if you see something, say something. Is there anything where if you just may as a faculty member, is there anything in place of pulling that person aside and being like, "Hey, here is how we would have approached it via ECP
It's pretty informal.
curriculum?"
It's pretty informal. And I'm sure if any faculty member called Nancy and said, "This went on at the weekend, do you mind if I deal with it?" The answer would be I know Nancy's answer would be, "Yeah, feel free to deal with it." That obviously has to be handled delicately and privately. Can't think of many scenarios where that would be not be encouraged, wouldn't you say, Emily?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that for all of us, we're about bettering the sport, right? So if we're seeing things that are not looking good for the sport or not looking good for the rider or the coach, I think we all respect the other professionals in the sport. So we're cautious about jumping right in. And as he said, a lot of those things need to be dealt with privately and on the side. But we're certainly we're all about betterment of the sport and promoting it long term. So if something's happening, we need to intervene in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely it's not an easy line to walk. Like it is. I think we all recognize that. It's just finding out how do we walk that line and how do we do it in a way that benefits, yeah, the horses and the riders.
I've actually had one of those experiences this winter, so I can tell you how I did it if you want me to.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were at one of the events down here, and there's a young lady that's in our loop, in our orbit here. She was riding in the preliminary level, and Mikey came back to me and said what he'd heard, the talking, what he'd heard, and I'm like, oh God, how do I deal with this now? And what it centered around was just jumping through combinations with no idea at that level, with no idea and no real instruction on what the course designer's aim was regarding what the distance is between one fence and the other. Now, that distance can change depending on how you jump in, as we all know, and the character of the canter that you bring to the question. But I found that quite alarming that there was no concept. So I went and asked the question, how are we going to do this? And I just got a blank stare. That can spark all sorts of thoughts, and I'm sure it will when this podcast releases. However, I do think that we should be educating our young riders and kids to have some idea of what the intention of the course designer is when we start jumping fences of that height that are related and close enough that you actually have to have an idea of what you're doing. So I handled that very delicately without being too aggressive. But privately, I'm just shaking my head, to be honest. That is still out there. That idea is still out there, and in the end, I think you're going to end up paying a price for that, or the horses will, if that isn't addressed. So I addressed it in the most delicate way I could without upsetting anybody, and everybody was fine in the end. But that wasn't without some serious thought.
Yeah. Those are hard conversations to have for sure, but it's so important. Yeah, safety is like the most important thing when we come to this when you talk about this sport, just because yeah, there are a lot of elements in play, and we have to do our best to make sure that those things are handled appropriately, because yeah, it's horses and humans and a lot of people that are at risk.
It's an area I think that not it's hard because everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has days they'd rather forget. Everybody has days that they remember, and you're all trying to get it right all the time and be consistent. But I think a fundamental understanding of what a course designer is asking of you is probably a good idea, especially when you are modified and up. I mean,
Absolutely.
you look at a training level combination, if you stand there for the whole class, you'll see it get ridden probably, sure Emily agree with me, you'll see it ridden probably 3 or 4 different ways, depending on what people do. Well, those margins get thinner as the fences get bigger and the angles get tighter, etc., etc. So I think it behooves us as a sport to be teaching the basic concepts, and then definitely from the modified level up we actually train that here. When I'm training the guys here, we actually talk about plan B and C. We actually train plan B and C. But I found that quite shocking that was a whole grey area that had never even been presented, that information. That's how you turn over eventually, I think. So that was addressed. Don't worry.
That's good of you. And we all value that you address that, Robin. That's really important. So as an ECP coach, you guys kind of talked through the why of it. Like, why would you participate in kind of the professional and personal development that could come from participation in the program? Are there any other perks or benefits of being an ECP certified coach that are worth pointing out?
Well, you do receive your name ends up on the list on the USEA website, right? So you do receive a little bit of publicity in that way. And we are working to keep building different areas of benefits. And we've just started this year um, providing lanyards and badges so that it's a bit more visible. The ECP coaches are more easily recognized. So that gives you a little bit of a boost there just in the recognition. And I mean, I think to me, a big part of it is the continuing education aspect, right? Like the continuous growth as a professional. And we just always go back to the same thing Robin was discussing, which is just the pool of knowledge that you get. I mean, it's just amazing.
I get
Absolutely.
I get a small discount on my insurance.
That's good to know. That always helps.
Yeah.
Are there any success stories or notable examples of how the program has positively impacted coaches or riders?
Emily, you want to?
I mean, I don't know of anything specific that I would point out. I do know that it's been really beneficial. There are certain areas of the country that are maybe not as big of eventing hubs. And I know that the program has really helped instructors in those areas. There's been a big push to kind of bring the program into those areas in order to build the education in there. So I don't know. I know that's where a lot of the different grants that people can apply for have gone to benefit instructors that maybe don't have a huge clientele, but they're really eager to raise the level in their area. So I think to me, that's been a big part of what I've liked to see, the kind of the grassroots effort and how that's helping to just improve all the riding and the coaching in more remote areas.
Yeah. What are those? Can you tell me a bit more about the grants and how coaches can apply for those or find out more about them?
And those are listed as well on the USEA website. I don't know all the specific details of all of them,
Yeah.
but there again, like Nancy is our resource. We go to Nancy for everything, and those are listed. So a lot of the time, it's just a matter of helping to kind of give the coach the financial support to go to the workshops and to go through the whole process.
It's awesome. It's really important. Yeah, because I'm my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing the workshops are probably in more of the equestrian hubs, like, that's where they take place?
Well, we've started in recent years, we've started having them in set locations just for planning purposes, but they can happen anywhere. So it just depends on whether or not someone wants to pull enough people together. I believe that it was out in Colorado where they actually were able to fund a whole workshop for all the participants just based on different ways that the area itself was able to put money together. I mean, I don't know all the specifics of it, but the workshops can happen anywhere. So it's really just a matter of having enough people that are interested to put it together. So yes, the ones that we have that are set on the calendar are more in, as you say, the eventing hubs, but we do try to spread them out throughout the country. As California, Maryland, and Virginia have some, Illinois, and then down in Florida, as Robin said.
Got it. And for a rider looking for a coach in their area, the best place for them to go in order to find kind of which coaches are ECP certified is that directory on the USEA website. Is that right?
That's right. And it does list it by the area.
Okay, super helpful. As somebody who grew up in Minnesota, and yeah, as you guys kind of said, there are kind of limited coaches in the area, or at least there were a couple decades ago, and that was the case for me. It's always super helpful to have a directory of, okay, these people have this foundation of education and they've gone through this curriculum. I at least have that kind of understanding or knowledge to go off of, I think it's really helpful. Okay, can we talk a bit about the future goals and vision of the program? You have really well walked us through kind of how this program has evolved over the years from its initial development to being ICP to now being ECP. What are the long-term goals for the ECP moving forward?
Well, I think we want to make it more accessible, right? That's one of our big goals right now is to try to find ways to encourage more coaches and instructors to become certified, to become part of the program, trying to make it more accessible, trying to make the process maybe a little more efficient. We're tapping into a lot of different ideas as far as being able to bring some virtual content, online content, help give, whether it's for continuing education or preparing for the workshops, give instructors a little bit more um, availability to that information. So we've got a lot of ideas along those lines, but I think that's a big part of it, is just pulling more people into the program. I think long term, that's going to help us in a lot of ways. I mean, I think we would love the idea that at some point certification is required, but obviously that's a long path to go down and it's not easy in this country. I'm sure Robin can speak more to that. But I mean, for our program, we would love that to be the goal.
Yeah, Robin, can you talk a bit about that, about making it a requirement and kind of what the thoughts are behind that?
The other countries, when we look at Germany, for instance, you have to have a license to teach riding lessons. End of discussion. That's how they run their equestrian life. I'm not sure where England is, to be honest. I don't think it's compulsory yet, but I do know they have a very strong coaches program that was just beginning when I left and came here because I was going to start getting involved in it. I think my gut tells me that the future of certification and the need for it will come from the FEI. And I think our will end up following that directive, but that's only a personal opinion. When you look at the whole social license debate, that David started talking about that, and we've talked about that quite a lot since. So I've expanded that to my friends at home, and you'd be surprised how much of the population in both England and Ireland ambivalent to the use of horse in sport. So when you look back historically, what are we? We're a generation and a half away from the war, and our horses are no longer for transportation. We use them for sport. You've had examples of people gluing themselves to the fences at Aintree, for instance. You've had all this type of thing. I think we've become more and more aware of how we're perceived outside our sport. We don't need unpleasant pictures on cross-country day. I think those swashbuckling days with badminton in April through the mud are definitely over. And I think that will do us no good to have that kind of a reputation as a sport. I don't know whether it becomes compulsory, but I do know that some kind of education is a good idea, especially as you're moving up the levels, or any level, but especially as I am saying that to a lot of the instructors from level 3 and up, that you end up rubbing shoulders with in a workshop situation or an assessment situation. Remember, if you're certified at this level, you're deemed confident and competent at the highest level. So are you okay in the big pond at the big competitions, in that atmosphere, prepared? Are you comfortable with that? It does, because that's where you're heading. And if you end up in that environment. So I think we have to be mindful of that. I think everybody should have some kind of education process, but it's going to come from higher powers, whether somebody actually says that it'll probably start in the cross-country warm-up. Unless you're certified, we'd rather that you weren't there. And that'll probably be a safety issue meaning a stopgap from pressure coming from the outside. But that's only a personal opinion. America's too rebellious to be told what to do when it comes to that type of thing. England is far more well behaved when it comes to, okay, this is what we have to do as a society, I think. I think a lot of people, when we've had these conversations in private in the past regarding compulsory certification, it's a lot of pushback about being told what to do. And so you end up meeting in the middle and, okay, well, we just need to be better and look after our sport. And otherwise our sport, it might not be there forever. You hear that debate all the time for different reasons, about the Olympics and whether it's going to be there long term and all these type of things. So I think it behooves all of us, no matter what level you're riding at, no matter what you're doing, is to present you've no idea who's watching you, to present, to go a good picture, meaning well prepared, well organized, quality efforts.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah,
think that's
no,
the purity blanket,
yeah, I think it's easy for me to say, but as a kind of a high level view, it does seem totally reasonable to have certification be a requirement. Like I just think about so many things in our daily life where people are required to be certified in order to do their job, and that is just an accepted part of that career. And there's so many elements. I mean, we've talked on it, but we touched on it already. But so many elements here that do make this sport seem like a really obvious candidate for that kind of oversight. You guys, we are almost here at the hour. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure to kind of open the floor to each of you and just give you an opportunity. Are there any topics related to ECP that we haven't covered today that you want to make sure that we cover? Emily, I'll start with you.
Sure. I know in talking to a lot of candidate coaches that there's always a little bit of worry that, okay, well, I don't necessarily want to go into a program where they're going to change how I teach or tell me how to teach, right? And so what I try to stress to everyone is that really this program is about giving everyone just more of a structure. As Robin said, whether it's coming up with a specific lesson plan and for the levels, sort of what skills are required, giving everyone this solid structure and then letting them be their own coach within that structure. And we don't try to tell people what to do. And I think it's been a really interesting experience for me, because there have been plenty of times where I've been sitting back watching one of the lessons happening and thinking, oh, I don't know if this is going the right way. This isn't the way that I would do it. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, the coach has gotten to the same place that I was hoping to get to in a different way. I really think that people need to understand that we're not trying to put everyone in the same exact bubble, right? It's not a cookie cutter system. You're not going to be judged based on if you say the same thing we would say, right? So I think it's a big piece for people to understand that this really is about just providing that solid structure, which gives us all, as Robin was saying, it's a little bit of security, right? We're proving that we are holding to a high standard. We've shown everyone that we understand the best practices for the sport, for the level we're trying to help people ride through. And in the end, the coach's role is very all encompassing. It's not just about going through and being able to spout specific theory. It's about being able in the moment to help the riders on so many levels. And the other part we haven't touched on yet, which is we do have an aspect of horsemanship that's very important to us. That as a coach, you also understand all those principles, the horse care, and so there's so much to it, and there's so much information you can gain. And I think there's just, in my mind, there's no reason not to be part of a program like this if this is your profession.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Robin,
couldn't
yeah.
agree. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One thing I want to mention is technology. I'm not very good at technology, but technology is something that we need to use. We can do that in multiple ways going forward. We can be providing information for candidate instructors that are just getting going on the bottom of most of the people that want to be certified and go through the process have already done it. That was agreed on a long time ago. There are new people coming in now who are really enthusiastic, but not very experienced. I think we need to be using the technological virtual stuff to give them the information that they can study and that they can master without being in that one-on-one situation. Now, there is no substitute for coming to your workshop, getting involved, having to do it in live action and get on with that. But I do think we can take tremendous steps going forward, producing information within the ECP framework that is a reference. When I think about Phyllis and I making that, we sat down one night in California after an assessment and opened a bottle of wine and started making a list of what had gone wrong that day and how people get it right and how people get it wrong. And that list is a great list, but it never made it out of a closed meeting and then an open meeting at the convention. That type of thing I think we need to have out in the open so that instructors can use that as a reference. We had a pony in our workshop last week here. So I walk over to the lesson and I'm thinking, if I'm teaching this lesson, do I know my pony distances? What would I do if I was in this situation? And of course, I'd have to go look it up because I can't remember the last time I taught a pony, right? Great discussion was had regarding how to keep that productive and safe. And what would you do if this turns up in front of you? So I think technology can bridge the huge space that we have in this country that we can't be in loads of places all at once. We can't be everywhere all at once. So that, I think Emily would agree with me there. That's something that we need to think long and hard about. We have a hard handbook, printed material. I think beyond that, we can go a next level to these are the fundamentals. This goes back to my conversation with the cross-country thing earlier. These are the fundamentals of what a course designer is trying to ask you. And how do you set it up? There's lots of things that we can do, especially when it comes to cross-country schooling. That would be something that I'm going to be pushing for as co-chair going down the road, because it's still pretty weak. Wouldn't you agree, Emily?
There's so many different elements that can be pulled into play all the time.
Yeah.
Having a thought process, I think that's a big part of it with the jumping phases, is making sure that the instructors have a thought process of how to build something so that you're achieving success, right? We're not trying to put anyone in a situation where they're having troubles. We're trying a nice path forward that is, safe and educational. And if problems arise, we want to help someone through it. But especially in the cross country, there are a lot of elements that people just don't think about.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, you guys, this has been so informative, and I really appreciate you sharing your Monday morning with us and you taking the time to share your expertise related to ECP. And I encourage any coaches who are listening who are interested in participation to reach out to Nancy and learn more, because I think as we've talked about, I think the sport is heading more and more in this direction. The need to be certified is not going to decrease over the next few years. And if you're a rider, I also encourage you to go online and check to see if your coach is certified. If they're not, encourage them to become certified. Show your support in that way, because I think that we can all benefit from that shared knowledge. So with that, you guys, thank you so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. And Emily and Robin, thank you guys. And we'll talk to you guys all soon.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.